Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on X at Movies TV Mad and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad. X, a very warm welcome to Sunday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. Zack Snyder must be the most misunderstood director in the history of Hollywood. It filled my heart with great joy to see the Snyder fans come back to social media celebrating Zack's DC movies. Not by swearing, not by being toxic, but by celebrating the man's work. Very, very familiar names that I stood side by side with when we were fighting to release the Snyder Cut. It's very, very interesting, isn't it? Since Zack Snyder went on the Joe Rogan podcast, I've gone down my social media feed, and one of the most things I've seen on my social media feed is, how did WB ever let Snyder loose? How did they ever give him the keys to the DC kingdom? Because one of the things I keep on seeing is that Snyder doesn't understand DC, doesn't understand Superman. But one of the things I have seen the most of all is that apparently Zack Snyder doesn't understand Batman. But actually, he probably understands Batman a lot more than many other people. Why is his take on Batman more controversial, for example, than Matt Reeves' The Batman take? A very, very racist movie towards white people, where basically black people are good and the white police are bad, where the black politician is good and the white politician is bad. Why didn't he race swap the Riddler to a black man, but he race swapped Commissioner Gordon to a black man? Because Commissioner Gordon is literally one of the only good policemen who happens to be part of that police force, but the white policemen are corrupt and are a problem. Why isn't that controversial? And why is Zack Snyder's take on Batman, especially in BVS, controversial? I don't actually think, it's controversial, because this is one of the huge misunderstandings about Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice. He's not saying that Batman branding criminals is a good thing. He's not saying Batman killing people is a good thing. He's saying, here's a costume character who's been putting away villains for 20 years. And let's imagine Gotham City is a real place. It must be, if it's real, it will be a very hard place to police, to be a masked vigilante in. It is so corrupt, it's full of crime. And here's this one guy trying to deal with it. For 20 years, he's had a no-kill policy, right? Then he loses Dick Grayson, his ward, someone who was a son to him, who was brutally murdered by the Joker. And then this alien, Superman, arrives. Because of Superman, Zod comes to Earth and people die. Thousands of people die. Then he sees what happens in the desert, even though it's not Superman's fault and he's being stitched up by Lex Luthor. So he's angry, he's bitter, he's branding criminals, and he begins to have a hatred for Superman. And he's seconds away from killing Superman. Then Lois Lane tells him, he's saying the name Martha because that's his mother. So he stops fighting him. He decides not to kill Superman, not because his mother's name is Martha, because he sees a real person, a good person. He sees that he's about to kill a good person who's doing what he was doing 20 years previously. He was Batman 20 years ago, right? Do you get it yet? And then he sees Superman sacrifice his own life. An alien sacrifices his own life for humanity. This inspires Batman to go back to being the hero he once was. A hero with a no-kill policy. A hero in Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut that has faith again. Has faith in Superman. Which inspires him to put together the Justice League and fight Steppenwolf and Darkseid. It's his inspiration. Superman becomes Batman's inspiration. Is there anything more Batman than that? And for me, Zack Snyder gets it. His take on Batman isn't that different to the comics or other films. The only difference is he's going about it in a different way. And the people who hate Batman versus Superman, who hate Snyder, Snyder and the way he makes movies, have misunderstood what he's trying to say. He's saying Batman's wrong for branding criminals. He's saying Batman is wrong for killing criminals, right? He kills that, no, he doesn't kill him, but he brands the guy who's been ferrying these illegal immigrants. And because of that brand, that guy gets murdered. That's on Batman. But then again, think about this for a minute. That criminal who dies in prison, how many illegal immigrants have died because of that person? Nobody thinks about that. But Batman isn't right for doing that. Zack Snyder isn't saying that Batman's right for doing those things. Zack Snyder is a pioneer. If you went to film school, right, and I gave you your first exercise, right, and I say to you, right, I want you to remake James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, or you can remake Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Which one do you think will be the easier film to remake? We all know that. And if you say that Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is easier to remake than James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, you're lying. I like James Gunn. I like his sensibilities as a director. But I don't think he's a pioneer. Zack Snyder is. You know, Zack Snyder went to art school as well as film school as well. He shot Man of Steel with a handheld camera, mostly. That's insane. Even Russell Crowe said that himself, but he did it. And it's a very artistic looking film, as is BVS, as is the Snyder Cut. So I don't really get the hate. Well, I do get the hate. I don't agree with the hate, but I get the hate. He's different. He's taken these really famous pre-existing characters and he's done something very different. But all he's saying is that Batman has been, doing the right thing for 20 years. But then he loses Dick Grayson. He sees this alien and he sees this catastrophe around this alien. And he decides that this alien's a threat and he has to be killed. It's only when he realizes that this is a guy with a mother. This is a guy who sacrifices himself for us, right? He could have given that kryptonite pole to Wonder Woman, as we've discussed before, but Superman would never do that. And it's an interesting moment, actually, when he's about to sacrifice his life. All of a sudden, he's got the spit curl. Do you get it? He becomes our Superman that we've known and loved for generations at that moment. He is Superman at that moment. I remember seeing that moment in the cinema and thinking, yes, that's Superman. That's my hero. I grew up reading and watching. And basically, Snyder has got the same opinions about Superman and Batman, right? But he wanted them to earn the right to be the characters that we know and love. And there's been this misunderstanding. So then there's this debate, should Batman ever kill? Well, he's killing. He's branding in BVS to show you how low he's sunk, because it's inspired by The Dark Knight Returns. Now, I've never read The Dark Knight Returns. I've watched, the two-part animated, the two movies they did, right? And I can't even remember. I don't think he actually kills in that story. But the point is, Batman has sunk so low. Batman versus Superman isn't saying to you that it's right what he's doing. And this is the misunderstanding. But people have taken offense because he's actually killing people in that film. He's actually branding people in that film. But the point is, this guy becomes the villain of the movie. Batman is a villain in BVS. He isn't, the character we know and love. Now, there's a director called Brett Culp who did a wonderful video on this film many, many years ago. You should check it out. And he's done documentaries about Superman and Batman. And he said it brilliantly. He said, I didn't recognize this Batman. I didn't like this Batman. But that's the point. The point is, this is about a hero that for 20 years believed in fighting crime in the right way. But then he started to lose things. Then he sees this alien and it fundamentally changes him. But when he sees this alien sacrifice his life for humanity, it takes him back to who he once was. People said after watching Batman vs Superman, this is not even about Superman, this film, it's more about Batman. Actually, what's amazing about Batman vs Superman, it's about both characters. It's about Superman fundamentally going through this, this hatred. Everyone hating him. Not everyone, but a lot of people hating him and wanting him gone. And some people celebrating him. I mean, tell me, if you dare to tell me he doesn't get Superman, he's got Lois Lane in that film saying, that dream gives people hope. This means something, pointing to his emblem. This thing gives people hope. And that's something that we all believe. So what is it about Snyder that people believe, doesn't get these characters? When he fundamentally does get these characters, he just went about things in a different way. It's not actually that he thinks Superman and Batman should kill. He didn't make the decision, as we say every day on this channel, for Superman to kill Zod. That's on David S. Goyer. Now, I would be script doctoring some of the things in the Snyderverse. For example, I would have had Superman blaming himself for what happened with Zod. There definitely needed to be some kind of dialogue there. There should have been some dialogue, as I've said many times before the end of Man of Steel, where he says, I know what it's like to kill. I never want to feel that way again. That's where maybe there's a little mistake that could have been corrected. But all in all, Man of Steel, BVS and the Snyder Cut are really about the journeys of two men who basically are trying to do the right thing, but don't always do. This is a Superman just beginning, and this is about a Batman who's been, doing this for 20 years. You ask a policeman who's been a policeman for 20, 30 years, it becomes tiring every time you arrest one villain, another one grows in their place. Isn't that what Bruce Wayne says to Alfred in BVS? Villains are like weeds, Alfred. You pull one up, another one grows in their place. That's the point. He's been doing this for 20 years and he's become angry and bitter. And that's the whole point. So really, what Snyder is saying and doing isn't that controversial. But unfortunately, we do live in an age where people who do things differently and uniquely are reviled and hated. Everyone keeps on telling me how James Gunn understands these DC characters more than Zack Snyder does. But you've only seen two things from James Gunn. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and James Gunn's Peacemaker. Now, is his version of Vigilante any less controversial than Zack Snyder's version of Batman? Please explain to me. His Vigilante, and I love his Vigilante in Peacemaker. I think it's a great take, but it's not the character that you've read in the comics. He's not even the character we saw in, the Arrow TV show, which is a lot more faithful to the comics, right? But James Gunn totally changes the aesthetics of that character and makes him this funny, wacky nut job. As I say, it's a great adaptation. It's very different. But why was it okay for James Gunn to do that, but it wasn't okay for Zack Snyder to do what he did with his 3 DCEU movies? Make it make sense. Why are the rules different for Matt Reeves and James Gunn to Zack Snyder? Why does Zack Snyder get less leeway? It doesn't make sense. Does it make sense to you? Explain to me, defend to me why it's okay for Vigilante to change so dramatically by James Gunn. And really, what's, in the end of the day, Zack Snyder, as I said, is not saying that Batman is doing the right thing. That's the point. That's why in the Snyder Cut, he keeps on telling Alfred, I have faith, right? I'm putting this team together, for him. I swore on his grave, right? He says a beautiful thing, Bruce Wayne, at the end of BVS, and it always breaks my heart. And I only watched the film yesterday, by the way, and I've already forgotten the exact dialogue. Me and my memory, it really is going, what does he say again? He says, I wasn't fed. He says something along the lines of, I didn't honour him in life. I'm going to honour him in death, or something like that, talking about Superman. Something along those lines, anyway. It's a great moment in the film, and the camera, slowly zooms into his face. Ben Affleck's performance in Batman vs. Superman is outstanding. And, remember the meme of the unhappy Affleck? The reason he's unhappy is because that film was slaughtered. And he believed he did something so compelling and amazing in that film. And I do too. Just because it's different, just because it's not the Batman that you wanted it to be, just because it's not the world's finest and it's something else, in the end, it does put together the world's finest, right? They become friends at the end of the movie. But people have hated Snyder deeply since Watchmen, and a reputation sticks. And, Snyder's name has been mud since Watchmen, and I still don't really understand why. And what this week has showed is how stupid Zack Snyder haters are. And they really are. They talk about toxic fandoms. Well, I know all about toxic fandoms because just by saying I love Batman vs. Superman, I had death threats in my DMs. I had people saying to me they were going to come to Cyprus and teach me a lesson because I liked the film. I wasn't abusing them. I wasn't having a go at them. I just said I loved the film. And I was being threatened. Do you wonder why the Snyderverse fans are the way they are? And I'd never defend the toxic minority, the vocal minority, because there is a vocal minority of Snyderverse stans who don't conduct themselves in the right way. But the people that I interact with are putting up pictures and explaining the movies and loving the movies. They're the good people. The husbands, the wives, the fathers, the kids. Right, they're the people I defend. And I'll defend them to my grave. Because they're just people who love what a director did. But when you're on the internet day and night and you see people hating on something you love continuously, it becomes a bit of a mystery. It becomes hurtful, and the hate for Batman vs. Superman is a mystery to me. As I say, he is one of the most misunderstood directors in the history of the genre. And Batman vs. Superman and his take on Batman is the most misunderstood take ever. I mean, when you look at that, that Batmobile sequence, it's amazing when he's going after those villains with the kryptonite. It's fucking amazing. The Batmobile looks awesome. It's directed beautifully. And, people talk to me about the Batmobile sequence in The Batman, which I enjoy, which is okay, but it's very short, it's very fleeting, and if I'm honest, and let's be honest, I know he built that car up from nothing, and I saw the BTS of The Batman, and it's great and all, but it's just a car. It's just a car. I know it's a pre-Batmobile, I get that, and I assume there'll be a more comic book accurate Batmobile. That's interesting, isn't it? Why was it okay to have a Batmobile that's not comic book accurate at all in the Batman? In Batman Begins, we see the Tumbler, which is cool, but it's not the Batmobile, is it? Let's be honest, right? Zack Snyder's Batmobile is more comic book accurate than the others. The choreography in the film is amazing. Batman's cool in the film. It's amazing. It's amazing to me. As I say, you don't have to like what I like. But the misunderstanding is that Snyder thinks that Batman killing and branding is good, when he doesn't. He's just trying to tell a story. But people got offended by the very fact that Batman is branding. That's the issue here, right? You're trying to tell a story of a character who's been around for 20 years, who's bitter, who's angry, right? Who sees this alien and wants to kill this alien, right? Because he's being manipulated at the same time. But, as I say, the film isn't saying that Batman's doing the right thing, but people are offended at the very fact that Batman is doing these things that he should never kill. He should never brand. He should never be that character. And Snyder's saying, right, I'm telling a story of an older Batman, of a bitter Batman, of a worn out Batman who needs inspiration again. He's not inspired anymore. There doesn't seem to be a Catwoman in his life. He's got nothing. All he's got is Alfred. And tell me, how can you tell me this guy doesn't know Batman after he decides not to kill Batman? He goes in that flying thing, right? I forgot what you call it, right? And, Alfred says to him, sorry, sir, I was listening in. The villains have got, Martha Kent here, blah, blah, blah. And Bruce Wayne says to him, Alfred, I don't deserve you. And Alfred says, no, sir, you don't. But it's a beautiful emotional moment. Because at that moment, we see the Bruce Wayne that we know and love. He feels so bad about what he became. And it's because of Superman. At that moment, he sees Superman for who he truly is. Alfred, I don't deserve you. And he kind of gets emotional because he's that little boy again that Alfred brought up. It's a beautiful moment. Batman vs Superman is a real fucking movie. And I feel, do you know what? While I was watching it yesterday, I was thinking, I feel bad for people who can't appreciate this film. I do. Again, I'm not saying you have to appreciate what I appreciate, right? But the point being is I'm glad that I do appreciate, that I can appreciate fine art. Because I would hate myself. I genuinely mean this. I would hate myself if I wanted everything to be the same. Isn't it a form of bigotry to look at a film that does things in a unique, different way and hate it just for the fact of being different? I understand your frustration, that you don't want to see Batman kill, that you don't want to see Batman brand. I understand, but the film isn't saying it's a good thing. It's a difficult thing to watch if you're a gatekeeper, because it's interesting, isn't it? Because the fans who are gatekeeping and attacking Snyder are the very fans who attack other fans for gatekeeping. It's interesting. I spoke about Smallville the other day and how that broke so much canon. And there were gatekeepers who weren't happy with that either. But in the end, people could see the changes that they were making were very, very interesting and bold. So Batman vs Superman is, and I mean, one of the most controversial aspects of Batman vs Superman, of course, is Lex Luthor, where people just don't like Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal. But again, this guy is jealous. He hates Superman. He sees him as this god, and he comes up with these references, these brilliant references. I think, even though I wouldn't have cast Eisenberg as Lex, I think the performance is very, very strong. And I actually like that version of Lex. It's not the Lex from, it's not the Lex we're used to, but actually the hatred for Superman is very, very comic book accurate. So that's interesting from a lot of nerds who don't like Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. And I don't know what kind of Lex Luthor Nicholas Hoult is going to be. I have no idea. I hope he's not going to be a more comedic Lex Luthor like Gene Hackman was. Gene Hackman was a Lex Luthor I grew up with. He was my first version of Lex Luthor in live action. I loved him, but he's nothing like the mad scientist that was first introduced to Superman comics, and he's nothing like the billionaire that we saw in the comics either from the 1980s. But I still think his Lex Luthor is valid and fun and interesting. It's just not my favourite interpretation of the character. And, Superman the movie is the first movie I saw and the first version of Superman. And I love that film. And I'm not saying I don't like Gene Hackman's portrayal. I'm saying it's very different. It's not comic book accurate. But people didn't reject Superman the movie. Because there are elements of Superman the movie that are not comic book accurate. The Green Crystal, right, that helps build the fortress, that does build the fortress, looks like kryptonite. But it's not kryptonite. I suppose that could be confusing. If you knew, Superman really well and you're thinking, well, he's holding, isn't that kryptonite? No, it's not kryptonite. So we can all nitpick things and attack things for not being comic book accurate. I think there's an aspect of fandoms where most fandoms are gatekeepers. But the reaction to Snyder in the past few days has been very, very interesting. And it's brought back, what's very interesting is, it's brought back the old conversations. This is all at the same time of another director making a DC film, making a Superman film. All of a sudden we were talking about that film and that director all the time. All of a sudden we're not talking about Superman, we're not talking about James Gunn. We're going back to an 8-year-old depiction of a film. And if you go on the Joe Rogan podcast, right, Snyder's trying to explain why he's having Batman kill in that film. You shouldn't have to explain yourself as much as Zack Snyder does. But he does. And I do think that Zack Snyder is now at a crossroads in his career. I mean, listen, the achievements are there for Zack. They are. He's made really, really good films in my book. Obviously, again, Rebel Moon was very, very divisive. We'll see the response to the director's cut of the first film, then the second film. But he's never going to change people's minds. But it is amazing. Ultimately, he does see Batman as a hero. I think that he sees Batman as a hero that shouldn't kill. But in this instance, in this story, he decided to show you what happens to a fallen hero after being a hero for so many years and losing. Losing so much. Because Bruce Wayne and Batman are only human. Nobody could take the losses that Batman's taken. Don't forget, this is the same guy who saw his parents murdered. That's why we see the death of the Waynes at the beginning. It's one thing after the other. And Superman arriving on Earth and all this catastrophe and seeing what happens to his employee, Wally. It's just too much for him. And he breaks. And Batman is the villain, initially, of Batman versus Superman. There's no question about that. He becomes the very thing he's been fighting. I've said this about Snyder fans as well. Some Snyder fans have actually become the very thing they were fighting at the beginning. Isn't that ironic? We started off as, being bullied for loving a movie. And then some people bullying others for liking another director. Or whatever it is. This discourse is stupid. But people are too stupid to, self-analyze themselves and say, you know what, we're being stupid. Love what you love. Love what you love. Zack Snyder made 3 DC movies. 4 if you add Watchmen as well. As I've said before, they're not going anywhere. But he's a very misunderstood director. And, just to see him trending is really, really funny. Just to see the old arguments come back and how easy the discourse has returned. It's the same conversations. It's the same discourse that's come back. But it is ironic that it's okay when Matt Reeves did what he did in his film, right? And I really love The Batman. I think it's an amazing film, but there are issues with the film. It is a controversial movie. There is a lot of white racism in that film. There's no question about that. Black people are good, white people are evil. It's the extreme left Hollywood, position. We know that. Not an utterance, no controversy. Everyone was fine with that. Maybe Commissioner Gordon should have been white and maybe the Riddler should have been black. But he was never going to do that because the Riddler is supposed to be a white incel. Get it? Right? And his followers on the internet are supposed to be more white incels. Do you get it? All the people wearing the Riddler's costume at the end of the movie, doing everything that the Riddler wants them to, are all white. At the beginning of the movie, that gang, are all white apart from one black kid who is hesitant in being bad and attacking that, is it an Asian guy, right? So everything's about race in The Batman. Do you get it? Do you see the extremism and propaganda in that film? Again, I love the film. Matt Reeves is a really good storyteller. but do you see the extremism in that film? Why isn't that somewhat controversial? Why doesn't Matt Reeves get attacked for that? It's a very, very interesting situation, isn't it now?